Are human beings and their activities destroying the planet? What does science really say about the impact of human beings on the Earth's climate? Find out next on this edition of Life Matters. Brian Johnston is the Western Director of the National Right to Life Committee. He has served in many capacities while advocating for innocent lives, as California Commissioner on Aging, as Chairman of the California Pro-Life Council, on the board of the National Legal Center for the Medically Dependent and Disabled. And now here's our host, Brian Johnston.
Welcome back to Life Matters, where your program on the right to life, that unique idea that's at our very foundation, the idea that each and every human being is endowed by their Creator with that inalienable right to be alive, that it's a gift not from the government, it's a gift from our Creator. But the government does have a job, according to the founders of the American government. The job of the government is to ensure our rights, our right to be alive. And it's from your right to be alive that all your other rights emanate. Your right to be secure in your person, papers, and property, your right to keep and bear arms, your right to free speech. It's because your life has incredible worth and value, and it's the job of the government to honor that. And that's what makes just governments. An important idea, but you know that there's a battle of ideas right now. It's a real battle, and they want into your mind. They want you to get confused about what the right to life is. They don't want any clarity on these principles because they would like to see a change in the nature of government and the dismissal of the value of human lives. Well, we have to fight in that realm of ideas, and that's what we do here. In our last program, we had a very important interview with Dr. Patrick Moore. Dr. Patrick Moore was the founder, one of the founders of Greenpeace. It turns out he was the only founder that had any scientific background. He had an amazing life. He grew up as a child basically on the Pacific Ocean, really an inlet from the Pacific up in British Columbia. His father was involved in forestry. And as a child, he grew up literally on the water, a floating village. And this immediately gave him a fascination with nature. And that's really at the heart of science, by the way. I consider myself kind of not an expert scientist, but I'm kind of an amateur scientist in this sense. I believe all of us are called to be knowing participants in life. And the word science means knowledge. Science is basically a way of understanding. And you'll see this pattern, by the way, not just in Patrick Moore, but you'll see this pattern in all great scientists, truly great scientists. Start with Leonardo da Vinci. He was an illegitimate child. He basically had no education. He studied art, and that was opening his eyes. But it's very clear that Leonardo thought methodically about knowing and understanding what is. And that's our job as human beings, to understand what's really true and to build and assert that which is true and right. And that's what our founders wanted to do when they founded this nation. And I believe it's still our job right now. So I do have some scientific background real quickly. My background, though, is in comparative languages. So it's not one of the physical sciences, although I did teach. For several years, I taught biology and other physical sciences, but it was at the easy level at 5th and 6th grade. You might say the introductory level. I had such joy because, when you teach that age group, kids want to learn, for one thing. But also, you go over the basics again and again, and I promise you, many teachers have said this as well. You never really learn until you teach. So going over the basic principles is very, very important, and I enjoyed that. I did teach at the junior high and the high school level and the junior college level as well, and also adult education. But clearly those ages, that was really a wonderful, wonderful experience. But I taught biology and astronomy and all those basics, and I studied it on my own as well. And I continue to do that. I'm kind of passionate about learning what's true and learning new things. And I found out that I've been taught many false things. And I have to test that, what I've been taught, to make sure it is true. And I find that particularly now in our current culture, there's a lot of falsehoods that are being presented as true, particularly when it comes to the realm of ideas and what form of government we should have and what history really did. History's being distorted right now. So you've got a job to learn what's true, and I do. So we're going to spend a little time today. We're just going to finish up with Dr. Patrick Moore. The reason he's significant is he understands the environmentalist movement. He's the only true scientific ecologist that was involved in the founding of Greenpeace. He had to leave Greenpeace for one simple reason. They came to a false and dangerous conclusion. Human beings are bad. Human beings are the enemies of the earth. And as Dr. Moore said, he had to leave them because they would not endure sound thinking. They would not follow science. They were making things up, trying to make it sound scientific. And that's happening all the time, all around you. Not just on the issue of environmentalism, but on every aspect of society. Falsehoods are being presented as if they're true. And if we can't recognize them, you're going to lose. Particularly now on the right to life. There's a battle about what is the right to life? Why does it matter? Why do we need laws to protect these babies or to protect certain vulnerable human individuals later in life? Especially if they're depressed. No, if they're depressed and ask you to kill them, we should be free to kill them. What's the matter with you? Why are you making them suffer? There's lots of really good emotional arguments they'll throw out there that have no foundation in real logic. And you don't give in to someone else's emotions. There's a reason you talk people off of buildings that are emotionally wanting to kill themselves, and it's not to keep the sidewalks clean. It's because it's not right to kill someone that's depressed. That is not a justification. And yet for some people, if they're depressed and sick, then you can kill them. Oh, okay, well, let's just herd them up. And then when you put them in those institutions, I've been in those institutions. I've been in many, many nursing homes. And you round them up and put them in there, they'll be depressed. And now we can kill them. Easy. It's illogical what they're asserting, and yet they make it sound so good. So we have to be true to science and objective fact. When we come back, I want to spend just a little time talking about science, real science, and why you are an amateur scientist. If you want to know what's true, you have a method of figuring that out. And we've been given that ability to figure that out. Now, a lot of my Christian friends sometimes think that science and faith are at war. They're not. So if you're a Christian, please don't be afraid of science. You use it every day. And it only helps if you learn its principles. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's our friend and ally. God says many times in the scripture, let us reason together. We're called to use reason to follow objective facts, not emotional facts, but objective facts. So we'll talk about the power of science, why it's the basis. We use the facts in the right to life. The facts are on our side in the right to life. And facts are terrible things to waste.
Life Matters continues after this.
Well, hi. I just wanted to thank you for joining me. You know, I have good friends, children, young adults, and adults that have Down syndrome. And they are so loved. Their parents love them so much because they're the happiest people you'd ever want to know. I really love them. I'm going to tell you something, though, that's rather frightening. The government of France has now prohibited showing positive images of Down syndrome children and letting parents know how lovable they are. That's an actual law in France. Here in the U.S., 80-some-odd% of Down syndrome kids are killed by abortion before they're born. In France, it's 96%. So we're not a whole lot better. If you'd like to help out, you can go to the National Down Syndrome Society, ndss.org, to help out. That's ndss.org. We really are in a battle of ideas, and lives really are at stake.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Well, welcome back to Life Matters. We're talking about science, and we want to remind you the power and importance of science. Don't be afraid of it. Dr. Patrick Moore is a scientist. He was part of Greenpeace and had to leave that organization because they were lying about science. And they're lying about the environment. And he was proving that they were lying, but they wouldn't have it. And their greatest threat is this: they don't like you as a human being. That's a very bad idea, particularly if you put it in law. And the problem with ideas is that people eventually want to enforce them. They want to put them in the law. And that's happening now in our nation, and you have to be ready for that battle. And if there's ideas that are attacking the human person, you need to be aware of that and not let yourself or your family get caught up into believing some of those false notions. So before we talk about Dr. Moore and let him finish his comments we had started last time, I want to talk about real science, and it's not about institutions. People think that. Oh, well, unless you have a doctorate in clinical biology and use polysyllabic terms relentlessly, you're not a real scientist. No. The best scientists, the most outstanding scientists in history, in fact, often didn't go to any institution. From Leonardo da Vinci, who was an illegitimate child in Italy and basically studied art. He didn't study academically. He just sat with an artist and learned art. But more importantly, he was observant, and he had a thirst for knowledge. And perhaps most importantly, he approached things in a logical way, observing and testing. The basis of science is observation, then hypothesis. That means a guess. Well, this happened, I think, because of this. But then you test that hypothesis. Observation, hypothesis, testing, and theorem. Then you can say, is this true? But you keep testing continually. That's the nature of science. It's never done. I personally feel, and you should feel the same way, your learning is never done. That's how the best scientists were. Edison, probably the most famous American inventor, had no schooling. He was a flunky, if you will, and was homeschooled. But his mother encouraged his zeal at learning, and he continued through his whole life and had more patents than any other American in history. An incredibly inventive man. He didn't go to any institutions. He is famous for, I think it was 800 different filaments testing for a light bulb, and each one he said, well, that's not a failure. Now I know what doesn't work. He saw it as an exciting challenge. Science isn't our enemy. It helps us learn and understand. Ben Franklin, I can't tell you enough about Ben Franklin. Again, a very down-to-earth man, but he understood the zeal for knowledge, and at the time, not just was an American founder, was respected as one of the most brilliant scientists on earth during his lifetime. And he opened the door for Edison. He opened the door for experiments in electricity. And the flying the kite is just a caricature. He really studied electricity and science and life. And so it's those people who have the zeal for knowledge and then use the methods to come to conclusions. Sadly, science today has been assaulted by ideology. And so we want you to know that. In a previous series of programs, if you go to our podcast 84 and 85, I talk about the ideology now that has infected our culture, progressivism, and Hegel's progressivism, how it is a false science that's actually a religion. And that's why you have people today, whether it be someone like Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders, who are asserting as true certain principles of law, certain principles of government that they say are true and just, but they haven't looked at the science of it. They're not objectively true. But that doesn't matter. They believe an assertion is as valuable as a fact. But assertions are not facts. They have to be tested first. So we're going to listen now. We're going to go back over some of Dr. Moore's background with these folks in Greenpeace, and then he reiterates some very specific, deceitful statements they've made, intentionally defying science and doing violence to science and to objective truths. And as I said, we base our movement on objective truths. Self-evident truths is what the founders said. Science is on our side. The facts are on our side. And facts are terrible things to waste. So don't be afraid of scientific knowledge. The real fear is how people use it. And we need to make sure that it's used properly. Science, by the way, I was in a debate real quickly with a guy arguing that science insists we must use embryonic stem cells. He actually was arguing that it was possible. It was a moral imperative because science said it. Well, that's a lie. Science doesn't dictate morality. Science is a tool, like a tool in your tool chest. And who uses your tools or misuses your tools, they might have moral culpability. Someone can use a heavy monkey wrench to kill somebody. But if a truly scientific knowledge that's valid, because again, scientific knowledge is itself a tool. It can be used for good. And throughout human history, it has. Dr. Moore makes that point. It's not that human beings are bad. Human beings are the ones that are bringing the answers, that are bringing clean water, that are bringing clean energy. Human beings are the blessing to the earth. They're not the curse. And so proper science is really important. And the use of knowledge is critically important. In all you're getting, get knowledge. In all your understanding, seek wisdom about how knowledge is used. So back to Dr. Moore and his challenges with the radical environmentalist movement after this.
You're listening to Life Matters.
You know about our car donation program at California Pro-Life. We use one of the most respected programs in the nation. Go to the California Pro-Life page, californiaprolife.org. Scroll to the bottom and click on Donate My Car. It's that easy. Did you know you can also donate any vehicle, boat, motorhome, or even personal property? If you are nearing retirement age, you can also get a tax deduction by earmarking a portion of your upcoming compulsory distributions from your 401k. Just email us for information. California Pro-Life is fighting to equip California pro-lifers with understanding and the tools to again protect the unborn and other vulnerable innocents. Thank you for your help in this battle. Go to californiaprolife.org. That's californiaprolife.org for more information.
And now back to more Life Matters.
Welcome back to Life Matters. Environmentalists right now are saying genetically modified crops are evil, that it's an evil use of science because mankind is using it and manipulating nature. This is a canard. This is an absurd statement. I know that if you're involved in any type of the biological sciences, you have to be aware of Linnaeus. Linnaeus is one of the early scientists. Linnaeus went way back and he helped to establish our understanding of a lot of things, but he used genetically modified food, peas, I believe. But I spent quite a bit of time in Santa Rosa, California, where Luther Burbank had his gardens. And during his lifetime, Luther Burbank was an incredibly admired scientist who basically manipulated, you might say, genetically modified plants. That's what he did. Many plants are genetically modified. If you're involved in agriculture, almost every walnut tree in the state of California is actually, they're black walnuts, but I believe the rootstock is European walnuts. And it's because the roots can endure the mites better, but the black walnuts produce more fruit, more nuts. It's very, very common in horticulture. It's very, very common to modify things. The rootstock for most vineyards, I believe it's a St. George's vine. That's the rootstock because it can endure the climate better, but then they put in the Chardonnay or the Cabernet, whatever other grape, they actually splice it in to grow that particular variety. So manipulating plants and genetically modified food has been with us for a very, very long time. And the routine dismissal of genetically modified food is just ridiculous.
Then you have genetically modified crops pose a danger to human health and the environment. Back to the invisible. Where is the devil? Where is the ghost in the seed of genetically modified foods? Has anybody seen it? Has anybody put it under a microscope so we can see it? No, because there's nothing there to see. There is nothing there. This is a complete hoax. Substantial equivalence means there is nothing different about the GM variety from the many non-GM varieties that is in any way significant to anything, except it's now resistant to the larvae of moths and butterflies in the case of BT varieties. But nothing in there poses any harm to anyone, and yet they've made people label it. They've turned Monsanto into an evil giant. They're a seed company that also is crop protection chemicals.
Amazingly, the radical environmentalists do not want rivers dammed at all. But it is, particularly in California, if we did not dam our rivers and engineer in a good way, it's a good thing, engineering nature, because of floods, for one thing. I live right next to the largest river in Sacramento. If it was a wild river, we couldn't live here, and Sacramento would flood routinely. And there's danger every year still of flooding because we haven't built all the dams we need. Radical environmentalists actually oppose hydroelectric dams. They oppose that form of energy, and it's a clean form of energy. But they're so committed to the environment and not touching the environment, they consider it an evil. It's intellectually dishonest.
Hydroelectric dams should be torn down and no more built. No more built applies to Site C in British Columbia, 1,000 megawatts of clean hydroelectric renewable energy. The Greens are opposed to hydroelectric energy, even though it is renewable. The only problem with it is it's really cost-effective and works 24/7. They don't like things that are reliable.
A lot of environmentalism uses junk science, and in the case of malaria, it's taken millions of lives. Malaria is incredibly deadly, but the use of DDT eliminated malaria from North America and from Europe by 1960. They don't tell you that. And once DDT was removed from the market, the cases of malaria skyrocketed in third world countries till in 1980, 1.8 million people died. They don't tell you that. And it was only the reintroduction of chemicals that has brought down the cases of malaria in the third world.
Pesticide residues in our food cause cancer, birth defects, autism, and brain damage. Zero evidence of that, according to the Cancer Institutes of the US and Canada in a joint study. Yet 30% of cancers in humans are caused by tobacco consumption, and 35% are caused by bad diet, mainly too much fat and cholesterol.
A huge and ongoing issue is the idea of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels should not be banned. Fossil fuels actually have been very beneficial. This assertion that the CO2 is what's killing our environment is completely false. Dr. Moore makes that point, and yet it's gained traction that somehow CO2, if it wasn't for carbon dioxide, plants wouldn't have anything to live off of, by the way. Plants live off of CO2. But more specifically, we now have billions of dollars from the government being poured into this worldview.
Fossil fuels should be banned as CO2 is causing catastrophic climate change. CO2 is invisible, so they can make up any story they want about it. Salamanders are getting shorter. The quality of red wines is declining drastically. Any number of BS stories that come out every day from these people. They just make stuff up. So I'm going to focus on this last one for quite a while here. There's the curve. It's called the Keeling curve because Mr. Keeling established the recording station at Mauna Loa on the top of the big island of Hawaii to be away from industrial sources. And they say that this is causing catastrophic human-caused climate change or global warming. It is not, and I will demonstrate how we know that. But not everybody believes that. These people not only believe that CO2 will cause catastrophe, but that it already is. All you have to do is look outside your window, they say. And I look outside my window and I see a beautiful mountain range with a glacier on it and covered in trees and an ocean in front that's full of life and birds and fish and ducks. And I'm going, what am I supposed to see when I look out the window? I challenge the whole climate change alarmism people. Name me one factor in weather or climate today, because they say weather and climate are different, when in fact climate is just the average weather. But okay, they're different in that sense. Name me one factor that is anywhere near out of line with the last 10,000 years of weather and climate in the Holocene glacial period we're in now, the interglacial period. Nobody has named a single thing that they say is out of line with anything that has happened for 10,000 years. Because there isn't anything happening today that is anywhere out of line with the last 10,000 years. So right off the bat, why would you blame CO2 for nothing? What's it being blamed for if there's nothing happening that is any different than it was for 10,000 years? This is NASA at its worst. They do good things too. but they also collect over $1 billion in climate change research money from the federal government in the United States. You'll remember when they kept sending missions to Mars, every time they wanted to do a new one, they would say, yeah, but there might be life on Mars. You never know. We might find it there, right, to get the money, because that tweaks people's interest if there might be life on Mars. The very first Mars lander proved there was no life on Mars. I know my friend James Lovelock of the Gaia hypothesis, who is a medical doctor and a chemist and was hired by NASA for the first Mars lander to design the life detection technology. When it came back, he said there is no life on Mars, and he did that by understanding the chemical equilibrium between the rock surface and the atmosphere. For example, if you found oxygen on Mars, you would know there was life there, because oxygen is all life created on our atmosphere. Things like that. He found that the atmosphere was in perfect chemical and physical equilibrium with the surface, and therefore there was nothing altering that. And therefore there was no life on Mars. But they brought that all saw out about 50 times in the next 40 years, or 30 years, in order to justify their Mars missions. And they do this. CO2 controls Earth's temperature to keep getting that funding from the federal government. No credible scientist would ever say that carbon dioxide is basically the only important factor in the climate of planet Earth. But that's what they stoop to say. That's what I mean when I say this issue has destroyed the Enlightenment and scientific integrity more than any in the last centuries.
So the federal government has been using its money based on these false ideas, and the International Panel on Climate Change has a vested interest in continuing to spread this worldview. Now, you know people like Vice President Al Gore and other, quote, luminaries that are doing this, but this has become part of our culture to spread the misrepresentation that somehow human beings and human activity is destroying the planet, that human beings are bad, that human beings, you might say, should be punished and limited, controlled and culled. That is at antipodes. That is exactly the opposite of asserting the right to life and the value of the human person. You're in a battle of ideas. You've got to engage in this battle. You have to know that this battle, it's not a metaphor. Lives, when these ideas are put into place, lives are either lost or they're saved. Engage in this battle. It's worth the time and effort. Lives truly are at stake.
Life Matters is a production of the California Pro-Life Council, the state affiliate of National Right to Life. Wherever you are in the nation, you can find out more at National Right to Life. You can find vital pro-life information and also find the access to your state and local Right to Life affiliate. Get informed and get involved.